Guys, in today's video, I'll be discussing the 2025 New York City Democratic primary mayoral race. I'll be discussing the candidates, what their policies are, and their positions, so the data surrounding this race, as well as making my final predictions just hours before the race will begin and the polls close and the numbers start reporting. Of course, today's voting day, so if you live in New York City, you happen to be a registered Democrat, be sure to go out there and vote. First of all, I would give a brief description of some of the major candidates. The candidate that has been really leading for most of the race, as we know, is Andrew Cuomo. He is the former governor of New York, who resigned in 2021 amid sexual assault allegations leveled against him by 11 women. He has been the frontrunner of this race. He really tries to kind of get back into politics after resigning in disgrace 4 years ago. Another candidate who has recently risen to prominence and in some aggregates is now the favored is Jorgensen, who is a more progressive assembly member of the 36th district in the city of New York. If you look at some of the other candidates in this race here, the third candidate, according to many of the data points, who is of course in a distant third, is Brad Lander, who is this New York City comptroller. He's someone who really hadn't had much of a splash until he was arrested outside an ICE facility. He's also more of a progressive, just like Mamdani. And in fourth place here, who's not far behind Brad Lander, but still significantly behind Cuomo as well as Mamdani, is Adriana Adams, who is an African American and someone who's more establishmentarian, as in more moderate. This is a very interesting race, but there's a lot of things to go into. So if you really want to understand the race, you can really look at the endorsements. Andrew Cuomo has the endorsement of Bill Clinton, of course, the former president of the United States, someone who's more moderate, and a few more moderate congressmen, such as Jim Clyburn, who endorsed Joe Biden in 2020, Thomas Suozzi, a more moderate candidate from a more competitive district. We have George Latimer, who unseated Jamal Bowman with a more establishmentarian type of platform. You kind of really see the pattern here. Well, if you look at someone like the other candidate, Zahar Mamdani, who is, of course, the main challenger to Andrew Cuomo, you do see that he has the endorsements of people like Jamal Bowman, who is more progressive, the former U.S. representative who was unseated by George Latimer, Summer Lee, another progressive, AOC, we all know who that is. He also has the endorsement of Bernie Sanders, which just shows what type of a candidate he is, someone who's more progressive, someone who has really ran on the working class image. We have Brad Lander here, who also is more progressive, has the third choice endorsement from a bunch of these more progressive candidates. And so, if you want to look at the data here, previously, Andrew Cuomo was leading by huge margins. We're talking double digits in every single poll. Mamdani had been leading in one poll, but it was done by public policy polling, which is not the best aggregate. Not to mention that this was sponsored by a Democratic sponsor. I don't know who Justin Brandon is, but I assume probably more of a progressive who just really wanted to skew the poll. However, a more interesting recent rounds here, Emerson College, a very credible pollster by most accounts, actually shows the final round with a Mamdani +4 type of margin, which is quite interesting. And this race has tightened considerably according to every single metric. If you look at Polymarket here, Zohara Mamdani now has a 56% chance of winning, which is very different from a few weeks ago. If you look at, just less than 2 months ago, Andrew Cuomo was at a 93-cent share on Polymarket, while Zahar Mamdani was at 6.1%. Now Mamdani has actually become the favorite in this race. It's obviously still very close, but Polymarket is a very good predictor for this race just because people are actually betting their money on Polymarket. They're not going to lie because they don't want to lie with their money. They can lie with their mouth but not their money because that's something that's more tangible. Thus, this is a very interesting dynamic. In 2000, Polymarket has historically been one of the best predictors for elections because people bet their money, and as such, the results are significantly more accurate. And this does show that this race has become very competitive. Now, what is my prediction for this race, and what are some of the early numbers? The early voting numbers total right now has been around 384,000 votes, with the bulk of the vote coming from Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. That's about 90% of the vote, while the biggest county here is Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens. Generally speaking, Manhattan and Bronx are the areas that are the more progressive regions, the areas where you would expect Manhattan to do better, while an area like Staten Island, which is more conservative, more rural, and an area that supports Republicans more, would be an area that you might expect Andrew Cuomo to do a bit better in. But it is important to keep in mind that there is ranked choice voting, so we're not going to know who wins this race until in at least another week when they process the ranked choice ballot votes. So, what is my prediction? After all, you do see the kind of split between Mamdani and Cuomo. Cuomo, being the more established Unitarian candidate, would do better in the more conservative areas, the areas that are less progressive, and the areas that want an established Unitarian Democrat. I'm thinking probably Queens, Staten Island, and Brooklyn, while you'll probably see someone like Mamdani do better in Manhattan and Bronx. So turnout really matters. If Manhattan and Bronx gets more turnout, it's better for Mamdani. Vice versa, if Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island has higher turnout. So in this race here, it's still turnout is roughly higher compared to where it was in 2021 across the board. But Manhattan, Bronx, and Queens and Brooklyn have the higher turnout. Staten Island's a bit falling short if you look at the comparative here. But it doesn't really matter because Staten Island's only 3% of the vote. It's the smallest area and it's the most conservative region across the boroughs here. Now, it is important to keep in mind that there is ranked choice voting in this race, which means that we'll not know who wins tomorrow. It's going to be, it's going to take a very long time before we actually know who wins the election. That's because most likely, if you look at the polling here, no one's going to reach over 50%. That really makes sense because there's so many candidates and this race is so close. I'd be shocked if we know who wins tomorrow. But the final round probably occurs in 2 weeks. So the first round, it's a description, albeit it's not really the full picture. Now we look at some of the other results here and some of the what my prediction is for this race. Now, if you look at the first round returns here, I would say that Cuomo will probably lead in the first round. That does make sense. A lot of the other Democratic candidates are trying to unite against Cuomo. Zohar Mamdani and Brad Lander did cross-endorse each other. They are both progressives. Zohar Mamdani has been considered the second place candidate, Brad Lander a distant third. That being said, with ranked choice voting, that means that most Lander voters will probably vote Mamdani, but that does not matter for the first round. So Cuomo will probably lead in the first round, except I do believe that Bronx might slightly favor Zohar Mamdani. I'm not so sure. Cuomo might take Bronx as well, in my opinion, in the first round. I think that Cuomo will probably win this first round very comfortably. A big question here would be, does Cuomo lead by a little bit or a lot? If he leads by a lot, then it's going to be harder for Mamdani to catch up in the ranked choice numbers. But if it's really close in the first round, with all those cross endorsements, Zohar Mamdani will probably win in the final round. But we'll all know in a few hours' time. Now for the final round. This is what my final round prediction would be. Red would be Cuomo, and then light blue would be Mamdani. So I would definitely expect that Cuomo to really win Richmond by the largest margin. I'm thinking about 17% margin for Cuomo. Just because it's a more conservative region, you're less likely to see a lot of progressive voters. If you look at the other boroughs here, I think it's going to be more competitive. I think the best area here from Mamdani will probably be Bronx. Bronx is also considered the most progressive area of the 5 boroughs, but it's also considered the least populated overall, albeit it's roughly about 7 to 8% of the Democratic primary electorate. And I think that Queens and Kings, some of the biggest areas, will probably vote for Cuomo by a few percent, while I think that New York, which is also where Manhattan is located, will probably be one of the best sides for this race. As in, I'm right now expecting Mamdani to win. If Mamdani wins here comfortably, he'll win the overall race. But I think that if this borough is competitive, is really competitive, as I mean within a point or something, you're probably going to see Andrew Cuomo pull it off. Realistically, for someone like Mamdani to win, he'll have to be within a point in Queens or about within a point in Kings, which is going to be difficult. Now, what is my final prediction for this race? I posted this on Twitter, or you would like to call it X now, but in round 1, I predict Cuomo will get about 39.5%, Mamdani about 31.7%, which is about an 8% margin or so for Andrew Cuomo. On the final round, I think Cuomo will probably win by 4, or in this case, more specifically, 3.8%. I think that makes a lot of sense. We have seen that Zohran Mamdani has gotten more of the support by the other smaller candidates like Brad Lander. Adrian Adams got the cross endorsement from Mamdani, but she hasn't returned the favor. So it is a bit more complicated, but I think Cuomo is going to win the first round comfortably, and when everything is tallied, I think Cuomo will still win by about 3.8%. It's obviously very important to keep in mind that this is a rough estimate, and for a primary, I would say that the margin of error for such a prediction is about 5.5% or so, which means that these are not very accurate figures, as it's pretty specific, but it's probably not going to be how it turns out. There's a good chance that Mamdani could end up winning, and there's a good chance that Cuomo might actually overperform what I expect. Cuomo has all the political machines, while Zohran Mamdani has the grassroots movement. It's hard to say who's going to win right now, but this is my prediction. An important thing to look out for tomorrow, if Cuomo starts out with a huge lead, that's not good. That's not going to be good for Zohran Mamdani, even though he received a cross endorsement from Brad Lander, as well as a lot of the other more progressive candidates. At the end of the day, a lot of candidates only rank a few choices, so even if they got the cross endorsement, and again, a lot of voters may not know as much as their information intake is not as great. If they just rank one candidate, then the ballots automatically get discarded. Thus, if Cuomo does end up having 45-46% of support, Cuomo's going to end up winning the race. But I think that if Zohran Mamdani is within 1 or 2% the first round, with all those cross endorsements, he'll probably edge out in the final round. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and comment down below who do you think will win. It's really a 50-50 if you look at Poly Market. It's pretty tight in the polls. It's pretty different based on an individual opinion. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.